It's a lot of fun to see art and artists engaging with a lot of the other folks that they bring here, and I kind of think we torture them a little bit at the festival, which I think is important. So I'm going to start with two quotes because I have a lot of ambivalence about today's topic. Technology makes me nervous, and so I'm just going to read two quotes by two well-known painters. I'm going to go with painters. Audrey Flack, everybody knows Audrey Flack, the famous photorealist painter. Audrey said, "First, I try to obtain the highest quality of technical facility possible so that I have at my fingertips the availability to create anything I want. But then I paint." And then David Hockney said, "The thing with technology is that in the end, you always end up using scissors." So as I was thinking about this panel and thinking how Damien really hadn't done me a favor by asking me to do this because I am pretty much a Luddite. I'm on the wrong side of the digital revolution. I'm on the wrong side of the gap. The great news is we really do have three people here today who have somehow managed to perform the impossible, which is to take art and technology and bring it to people in communities and change their lives. And so our format today is we actually have special dispensation to show a few clips. That's very much frowned upon at the Aspen Ideas Festival, but Erica, thank you for making that happen for us. So I'll show you a clip of each. I'm going to let these guys talk about their projects a little bit. We'll engage in some dialogue, and then we'll open it up to you guys to come and ask your questions. Damien introduced everybody, and so I'll just give you one of my favorite facts about everybody. Of course, Tod is at the Media Lab, which I've had a chance to spend some time at this past year, and it may be simply the coolest place in the world. You go up there and you just walk from room to room, and it's dazzling. So my favorite fact about him is that he was one of the guys, really the guy behind the technology for the Guitar Hero video game. So
sorry if you're addicted.
So we're going to roll the clips blind and then let these guys come in behind and explain them, because each of the clips are dazzling. They speak for themselves. They need no introduction.
We'll talk about each set of clips?
We're going to run you're going to run your clip and then you'll talk. Yes, exactly. So guys, why don't you go ahead and run the first clip.
Okay. Frankly, with music like that, who needs nature? You know, that's like much better.
This at the end, I think. So. Okay, so Tod's a composer. That's a symphony. But, please, absolutely. Okay, but this one's a little different, Tod. Who composed the Toronto Symphony?
Good question. So I've done a lot of unusual things with technology over the years. In this particular case, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra came to me about a year and a half ago and asked if I'd write a new symphony for them. And I said I would do it if I could invite the whole city of Toronto to compose it with me. And I proposed that because I'm really interested in whether it's possible, exactly in the spirit of what Damien and Yo-Yo are presenting this whole week, of making a new kind of collaboration between, you know, experts, professionals, people who spend a lot of time with work, and people who love work, everybody else. Not crowdsourcing, but really working together. So that's what we did. Unfortunately, the Toronto Symphony said yes, because it turned out to be a pretty hard project. We launched this project in right before summer 2012, premiered it a few months ago, and that's what we did. We made a symphony of about 35 minutes. The idea was to make a portrait of the city of Toronto by myself, working with as many people who wanted to participate from Toronto to reflect on their own city. And we did it, we don't have time to go into all the details right now, but I did it by asking people to send me things like sounds of the city, their favorite sounds, their stories. We make special software that allows people who have no expertise in music to compose and send that in. I sent things out to the community, melodies, harmonies, sounds that people could modify. I sent sections of the piece before they were finished. We made special software that people could make their own versions of the finale. We had thousands of versions of the finale that I listened to, all of them. And we had sessions called Hours, with H in parentheses, where we did hour-long sessions, either via Skype from Boston to Toronto, or very often with me in Toronto, meeting with enormous numbers of different kinds of people to take some material from the piece and to shape it together into some final piece. So for instance, that first thing you saw was the youth symphony of the Toronto Symphony, so kids from 14 to 18. That was really cool. We took many recordings that had been made around town. That was a collage that I made of recordings from one of the beaches in Toronto. It's on Lake Ontario. And we did this in front of a large audience in the concert hall. And I said to these kids, okay, let's listen to the sound. Can you tell me where it is? And they, after a few times, got which beach. And I said, okay, we're going to listen one more time, and then I'm going to throw out the recording. And just with your acoustic instruments, let's try to make as close a reproduction of that beach as we can. But we did. And we did that with many of the sounds. So these sounds of the city got transcribed into the orchestra, and that was just one of the pieces. But anyway, it's a symphony made with the citizens of Toronto, and it was the hardest project I ever did, and that's a life of hard projects, but I kind of, there's something wonderful about it, and so I'm going to do a bunch more.
Thank you, thank you.
Aspen's next. No, that's it.
The Aspen Symphony. What do you guys got? Anybody got something? All right, so let's roll the second clip. This one may be familiar to some of you who are in my contemporary art world. There's no sound with this one, too.
That's Ben Rubin. He was our student. My student, actually. Great job. We're giving him the MIT prize next year. Yeah.
So it's just your basic do-it-yourself waterfall, nothing to it. So our next panelist is Kate Levin, and I don't think I have a fact so much about Kate as I do her title. I have decided that she is New York City's art czar. I guess czarina would be the proper art czarina. If you want to do something in public art in New York City, the road goes right through Kate. So tell us a little. What did we see there, and where were those particular projects placed?
I just want you to know I'm actually the queen of cultural plumbing.
My bad.
It's all about the bathroom. Those two pieces, I picked them because I think they encompass the opportunities and the challenges we've been working through in New York City under Mayor Bloomberg's leadership. The first piece is by Ben Rubin. It's called Shakespeare Machine. It is a chandelier made of 37 panels, one for each of Shakespeare's plays and one for the sonnets. And it was installed as part of a largely city-funded renovation of New York's public theater last October. Piece is interesting for lots of reasons. The way that it was shaped in the process of being installed. It's a permanent installation, part of the city's Percent for Art process. And Ben continues to think about the algorithms and tweak them, because what it does, of course, is take Shakespeare's work and reprocess it in different kinds of ways. It's not mashing up the language, but it's trying to pull out interesting patterns in the language, which is, of course, so fundamental to what Shakespeare's enormous achievement is. So it's a fascinating, playful piece that I think resonates in all kinds of ways for that institution and for that renovation. Second is a clip from Olafur Eliasson's NYC Waterfalls, which was mounted in 2008. It was 4 man-made waterfalls in New York Harbor. And interesting use of some fairly standard technology. It took about 270 tons of scaffolding to do that piece. Slightly more innovative to figure out how to process 35,000 gallons of water that ran over the piece. It's a temporary installation, ran for about 4 months, and because we're from the government and we are here to help, and public art really takes on so many issues around public space and proof of concept, this one really pushed us to figure out impact and participation in new ways. And so standard economic impact, $69 million, but we also came up with some pretty innovative ways to figure out who was seeing it, because it wasn't contained in a particular kind of space where you could just click a counter. And using cell phone technology, we estimated 1.4 million people saw the piece. 39% of them had never been to the waterfront in New York City before. Wow. And this was also the first piece where we were really able to track and actually see some social media participation. So posts to Flickr, blog posts, YouTube videos. First time we could really get a sense that there are all kinds of people interested in this work who would never get to New York and be able to see it.
I couldn't agree more. We're going to show one more clip, and before I do, Leo Villareal is a visual artist whose work I've been following pretty much forever. I had the good fortune this week to visit with Alice Walton, who just created a brand new museum in Bentonville, Arkansas, called Crystal Bridges. And while I was talking to her, I mentioned to her that I was going to be working with Leo, and she said to me that Leo had created in Bentonville, Arkansas, the quintessential piece of art, because the minute it was installed, it became the de facto gathering place for the community. And artists work all their life to do that, and in fact, that's what's happened there. So let's run this last clip and let Leo tell us a little bit about it after it runs. Oh my. What do you want me to say? Holy cow. What did you do?
Well, this is a project called the Bay Lights, and we opened it on March 5th, and this piece will be installed for 2 years in San Francisco.
You sure that wasn't CGI, right? That wasn't just computer-generated imagery? You just
That's real
footage. Okay, I just wanted to check. I want to make sure.
Footage.
There's a lot of skeptics out here.
Yes. It's there and up, and it's 1.8 miles long. It's between San Francisco and Treasure Island, using the old span of the Bay Bridge. And I was asked by Ben Davis, who runs a creative agency in San Francisco, to think about the bridge as a canvas and what would I do if I could do anything. So I created a 2-minute animation and started presenting it to some of the people at Caltrans that run the bridge, started winning them over, thinking, well, maybe we can actually get the permits to do something like this. I went through a whole process of, how much will it cost, raised an enormous amount of money, figured out how to actually install it on the suspender cables because it's an extremely harsh site. I had workers working in the middle of the night to minimize traffic. We had to do lane closures. They were hanging in baskets 500 feet over the water, hanging this delicate piece of electronics. So it was many heroic efforts and really engaging so many different people on many levels to realize this work. And I think what's exciting for me is it's just really a gift to the city and its economic impact. We did a conservative study that estimates it'll bring an additional $100 million into the San Francisco economy. We've estimated 50 million people will see this piece over 2 years. You don't need to buy a ticket. You don't need to know anything about art or technology. Anyone can engage with it. And light has such a universal quality. Anyone can look at it and have some sort of response. So it's been an incredible process to be able to engage with such a large audience, to make people look at this incredible piece of infrastructure, which is 75 years old and is an incredibly vital link to San Francisco in a new way, really changes the way people see. And I think it's also a example, for other artists and other cities. I know Christo wrote us a wonderful letter of support for this project, which was, I was so grateful for. And we did a presentation recently at the Conference of Mayors where we talked about the piece, and many other cities are lining up and they want to do it too, and find ways of engaging their cities in similar ways. So we see it as a template that others can follow, and hopefully we'll unleash all kinds of other good.
I think the thing that sticks with me about this is that we have a traditional view sometimes of what art is and also who's invited to participate in making a piece of art. You made the decision to literally engage the community. All of these projects engage the community in a different way, in a profound way, in a more open way. Why is it that that's interesting to you, Tod, when you're making art itself? Because you could easily just go up into the garage and sit there for days at a time, or into the barn, as you do. He's got a barn where he composes. And but what is it that you pushed yourself to do to make that, to flip the switch this time? Why would you do that?
Well, this has been kind of a strain through my career, since when I was a kid. And my background's a little unusual. I grew up in New York, and my dad was one of the people who started the field of computer graphics. So I grew up with kind of technology in the house. My mom's a piano teacher from Juilliard, but a very creative one, and I was her guinea pig when I was 2 and 3. And she used to have us, we'd have our piano lessons, and then she'd have a few of us stay there, and she'd say, well, okay, let's just take 10 more minutes. She'd say, go anywhere in the house, and everybody just find an object, and come back, and we'll see what they sound like. So we'd come back, and she'd say, okay, what does that one sound like? And she would have a lamp, or a book, or a pot, or what does that sound? Great. What does it sound like if you play that one really loudly? Oh, that one really soft. How about those two together? Great. What word would you use to describe that sound? We'd do that, and then she'd say, okay, with all those sounds and words, let's make a story. And we'd make a story with all these things. And at the end, she'd say, that's fantastic, that's a great story. When you go home, make a picture of this and come back next week, and we'll try to play it again. And in those little 10 minutes, I learned that not only can everybody compose music, but making your own something is the most wonderful thing there is in life. That making art is not, music's the worst, because on the one hand, it's the most direct, profound experience we have. On the other hand, there are all these barriers that make it difficult for people. You have to learn an instrument, which is great, but it takes years. You have to learn notation, you have to learn theory, but you don't have to actually. Music's in the world around us, music comes from nature, people decide what the systems are. So I just learned, from the beginning, I thought that's the center of things. And so my work's always been a combination of things that I do in my barn, without compromising, and things that I try to bring people in. This is the first project I ever did where I tried to combine the two, where I tried to say, I've done a lot of work that helps mentor other people to make their things. This one I said, let's make it together. I want to make a symphony that feels like my symphony, that I'm proud of, but I want everybody who participated to feel like it's theirs as well. And I personally think it's very hard to do, but that's what gets me excited right now for the next period.
Right. Now, Kate, I have a lot of Miami friends here, and we can't get a pothole fixed in our city. How does a city come together to do a project? I mean, I saw Oliver's project. Many people out here, I'm sure, did. How does a city come together? What kind of political will do you have to bring off a project like this, and why would you do it? I mean, when we talk about community engagement, what is it about a project like this that makes you want to put so much time and effort from the city into it?
In the case of New York, fortunately, we have a long tradition of having really engaged artists, and City's Percent for Art law was signed under Mayor Koch, so there was a civic commitment to doing that. But really in this case, when the day Mayor Bloomberg was inaugurated as mayor, he said he wanted to do Jean-Claude and Christo's The Gates. And it took 3.5 years to organize that, but I think it's hard to overestimate the importance that project had for the city of New York. It was really it opened in 2005, it was for 16 days. It took unbelievable numbers of community consultations, permitting, et cetera, but it was the first time that New York post 9/11 was featured in every media outlet all over the world for something that wasn't about death or politics or personal attacks on people. And I think it, in the future, will be shown to have really reframed the conversation around New York City. I think the reason the mayor is so invested in having us say yes to projects is because the future of cities, what will distinguish cities in the future is really quality of life. And when you can live anywhere in the work anywhere, when you are so interconnected, why you choose to be in a particular place really comes down to that. And what people, I think, really yearn for is a sense of individuality and at the same time a capacity to create community. And public art can be enormously controversial, but it also is a way of creating civic dialogue around a whole range of things that are very important to people. It helps them see their circumstances anew. And it also helps them really understand very different kinds of points of view. So we've permitted over 500 temporary art projects in the course of this administration. Every single one of them. The Eliason piece, again, involved permitting at all different levels of government. Anytime you go near the water, the snail darters come out and try and kill you. The mating streams of the sea bass and all this other kind of great stuff. But I think when you're taking up public space, you kind of have that obligation.
Because the East River is such a pristine place, let's face it. I mean,
What can I tell you? All those plastic bags have their own advocacy group. But that's why, I think the other thing I would say is government's in the business of delivering standardized and equitable service. You want your garbage picked up at the same time as everyone else. Art is valuable precisely in the inverse of the degree to which it's standardized. So, there are a lot of tensions and pressures around committing to it. But again, the value that you get from it, sometimes tangible, you can count, economic impact, but a lot of it's intangible, I think really does create a sense of distinction that's essential to cities.
Sure. Now, Leo, when you were right in the middle of this project, when it was kind of at the lowest point, did you sometimes wish you were just a painter? I mean, I wonder about that when I see these. Tell me how the city, the community, responded to the project before, and now you're in the during period. But what as Kate was saying, these things can be controversial. I think the thing I always hear is when Christo was doing his projects, he ought to spend his own money on like feeding the poor or housing the homeless or whatever. There's always these kind of people don't balance culture with the rest of the social services that are out there. What was it like before? Before you actually flip the switch, and what's it like now? Because I can feel that embrace, that warm embrace.
Well, there were so many challenges. I mean, this project could have been killed thousands and thousands of times on many levels. And I mean, our initial challenges were Caltrans, talking to the Highway Patrol, the Coast Guard, Homeland Security. I mean, all these different agencies. We had to do studies on the nesting of birds, and and particularly in California, people are very vocal. And I was messing with something that people care a lot about. And really, people love San Francisco, and this is the icon. So there was a lot of responsibility. But it was really about winning people over and getting people excited. The next challenge was finding patrons. I'm so grateful to have found incredibly generous San Franciscans who were willing to jump into this project, which was kind of crazy. And what are we doing? And why are we doing this? And but I think for me, their trust was really incredible.
And is the cost of the project, is it public, or is that
It's $8 million that we had to raise, which is really due to just the the scale of the bridge, and I still have trouble wrapping my head around how big that structure is. Each of our LED nodes is 1 foot apart, and as I look at it, I just can't believe that the distances that I'm seeing. And I've spent a lot of time looking at the bridge. So installation, getting all of it up, and doing a lot of testing as well. There was no way for me I had to sit in front of the bridge with my laptop programming it to see, this wasn't something I could do back in my studio in New York and just upload the sequences. It was really about being there with the bridge, site specifically, and night after night on the Embarcadero in whatever temperature. And but when people would realize I was actually controlling the bridge with my laptop, they would completely freak out. And,
In a good way or bad way?
in a good way. I'd have 30 people around me, and
He's controlling the bridge.
incredible, excitement and jubilation.
a bridge. Let's face it. I mean,
it's a lot of power, and they were very excited. Yeah. But that happened again and again as these kind of outbursts of when people are seeing it, they can't help but talk to the person next to them. So I've described the piece often as a digital campfire. It's something people gather around, and it's literally creating community and engaging people. And it has this, I'm not using any text, and I'm not using images. It's about abstraction. And all the patterning is inspired by the motion found around the bridge. So the movement of water, the wind, the atmosphere, but not in a literal way. I'm not using sensors. I've described myself as the sensor. So the artist is the sensor. I'm taking this input in, being inspired by it, and working that into the sequence. So my goal was to make something that was very integrated into its environment and felt very appropriate. It almost became like a mirror of the activity around it.
Versus a light show, because I know you've been very careful about that, and I think reasonably so. You've been working with light for a long time, but I think even the most uninformed viewer knows that they're seeing something that is not a light show. I think that's a really important, distinction.
Well, people have, they have so many slots in their head. They see light show, and then that's what they think. But it's kind of changing the way that they perceive it and showing them something new. We work very hard to describe this piece and to communicate it as an artwork. And we decided to use all white light in order to keep it on a more elegant and sophisticated plane. There's a lot of attention to the sequencing. I create all my own software tools and spend a lot of time with the patterning. So the content is very, very rich. And then it's also dynamically recombined on the fly.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask each of you, from the community perspective, and you can either do it by vignette or just by telling me generally how you feel. What was the community's reaction once they got the opportunity to experience the piece? Tod, did the community embrace it? I mean, I'm interested in what the reaction is, because there is a lot of pushback when you do these kinds of works. What happened in Toronto?
Right. Well, so the first thing which was interesting is, I'm from MIT, so I figured in terms of, we're trying to reach a city of 4 million people. We were trying to reach at least, some part of those. So I thought the easiest way to do that, to make community, would be online. And we had a huge social media component. And I realized very quickly, after about a month of getting the word out, we were getting lots of people who wanted to participate, but they were almost all the same people. There were already people who subscribed to the symphony and already people who were, so I realized that wasn't the right way. So we actually built a team in Toronto this is an interesting story about technology. We built a team to just go and meet people in the city. It's a very spread out city. And so all of the magic for building community was actually sitting down with people and saying, here's my crazy idea. What interests you in this? And in smaller projects I've done, we come with kind of a package of software. And about this one, it became a kind of project of about 100 miniature projects where, if I worked with a group of kids studying hip hop or an indie rock band or the musicians from the orchestra or seniors, every single project was different. Because of that, I think the community we built up was really amazing. And we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were sending musical ideas back and forth and meeting me and meeting my team. And when we did the concert, it was part of a big festival at the Symphony, and so it was completely packed. Totally different mix of people. I mean, there were subscribers, but there was every possible kind of person you could see. The CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company, streamed the concert live, and I don't know how many of you know the CN Tower that you could see so they gave us the code to the CN Tower. I don't know how many miles long, but it's the second tallest tower in the world. And so we had control of all of their LED lighting, which was synchronized with the
You
composition.
should have called Leo. He could have hooked you
Yeah,
up.
I have my own team. No, but anyway, so anybody in the city, and you could watch it online. Anybody in the city could hear the piece on your mobile device and watch the tower. So I think in general for the community it was fantastic. As almost everything I do for the classical music world, it was very controversial. I mean, there's always a huge question about who the artist is.
A lot of noise.
And especially for me, because some people know me for my operas and for my regular pieces, and some people know me for this. And a lot of people, when they see a piece where everybody's collaborating, go, how could that be a piece? But it is a piece. So
right.
now,
When Tod talks about his opera, he was just coincidentally nominated for the Pulitzer Prize last year, so we'll just toss that out there.
Nobody helped with that one. No.
He makes very clear. So, Kate, New York City is a place unto itself when it comes to culture. But when you get down into the boroughs, what happens when a piece like Oliver's goes up? Is it a prideful moment for the city? What's going on in the head of the general New Yorkers when they get up in the morning and go to work and everybody's talking about a piece like Oliver's?
I'd like to think that dynamic has changed for the better over the years. Every time you do a major piece and people enjoy it and realize that it's not somehow elitist or exclusive, it makes it easier to do the next piece. That said, I think art is scary, and individual artists are, for various, strange and dangerous reasons, I think, often looked upon with great skepticism. Actually, research shows they also end up being the most community-minded people in this country, and the citizen artist idea, there's research that shows it's true, but I think our national discourse around the arts has really created a lot of very polarized misunderstanding about the nature of art. So every project, I think what's also frustrating for artists is they start out from an impulse of, I want to do a great thing, and are horrified at the amount of pushback and resistance. So, the size of my stigmata is an indication of the fact that every single one of these is an adventure in an individual group of reactions. One of the things that we try and do, a lot of artists that come to us want to do projects in Manhattan, and we really, the way that the city gets involved with a project, our job is really to try and respond to an artist's vision, not to change it or mess with it. But one thing we've been pretty clear about is moving projects around. So, making sure that the waterfalls took place not just in Manhattan. Did a great piece with Paul Ramirez-Jonas in Creative Time a couple of years ago, Key to the City. And originally his conception had been to have a bunch of sites in Manhattan, and we ended up moving it throughout the 5 boroughs. And that was it's always a positive. So in other words, creating a broader base of exposure and stakeholderdom, and really engaging in participationeering, which is a horrible thing I'll never say again because I just invented it. But I think that's
A mouthful.
It sounds like a Disney word, actually.
God bless him. But I think that's it. In other words, the role of government in doing art is to be a translator of these kind of impulses that, for whatever reason, we are in a moment that hopefully is mitigating, is seen as a threat. It ends up being incredibly joyful, and when you try and take away a temporary piece, people come for you with knives. But I think built into the process has to be an understanding that you are inserting something into a very precious and fragile ecosystem. So part of it is just setting the expectations properly.
I think one thing that comes to mind for me, and it makes me think that Damien's onto something with the citizen artist idea. Last year when we were here, we had Laura Zabel and from Springboard in Minnesota, and Theaster Gates, who's going to be here again Monday, I think. And they kept talking about how we've got to stop thinking of artists as being special. And we got to start thinking about artists as being integrated into our society. We do think of artists as special, but not always in the way that we think of them special in not good ways, as Kate alluded to. And so I think that's an important component of what the citizen artist movement can and should mean. So I think that's a valuable lesson. And when you look at 3 very, very brave people up here who don't just make art for those of us that are the cognoscenti, but in fact make art that's meant to be seen by 4 million people, and Leo, maybe 50 million people. It takes a certain level of commitment and bravery to want to give back that way. Now, what you've got a ways to go. You got 21 months to go. What's happened in the community? What do you think people are feeling now that, nobody comes to town and is staying with somebody for a couple of nights who doesn't get driven by to see this, let's face it. So what's happening in the community? How are people feeling about this project?
Well, the media has been unbelievable. I mean, it's been overwhelming how the story grew from local to national to international, and the amount of people that know about it is very exciting. And people really want to come and see this piece and are making special trips to San Francisco to see it. There's so much it's a huge outpouring in social media. I mean, like just tons of videos, fan videos and Instagrams, and people really want to capture their experience with the piece. And I see just, on the opening night, incredible jubilation. We had we opened it on March 5th in the middle of a giant tempest. The weather was insane. But still, there were thousands and thousands of people out there with umbrellas, and people had set up camps, little tents, and parties, and it's just really a focal point for people.
And what will happen in March of 2015 when the piece comes down?
A lot of people have told me that they feel anxiety when the piece is off. So something's missing.
It's like when there's wristbands you wear that kind of squeeze. Okay.
So people really care about it, and I think it's operating on a level that's it's really ambient. It's not like a television or something that grabs your attention and demands that you. So it feels alive. It's really bringing the bridge to life. So it's hard when these pieces aren't there, and that's the same at the National Gallery. The IMP tunnel. When that piece is off, it feels like something's wrong, like someone turned the music off.
Right.
So that piece was supposed to be up for a year at the National Gallery and became permanent. There's a history of these.
One
things.
can hope.
There's a history of these things, and we're talking about it, but it's
Yeah.
really not for the artist to say my piece has to be permanent. And 2 years is a good long run for a piece of monumental public art.
Of course.
So I'm happy with the ephemeral and living in the moment and just enjoying it. And although having it there for people to enjoy, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah. We're going to go to questions in just a minute, but before we do, I want to ask each of our panelists. They've told us what they've just done, but I'd like to hear a little whispering about what's next. Now, Tod, I happen to know what's next for you because I have my plane tickets already.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell folks what you're working on?
I'll do that quickly, and I wanted to maybe just make one comment about technology also, since it's... Anyway, what I'm doing next is there's something about the city symphony, collaborative symphony idea that seems to have caught people's imagination. So kind of the day after finishing the one in Toronto, I started on the next one, and it's for the Edinburgh Festival this summer. So I should be working on it right now. It's not done yet. But it's for it'd be played by the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, one of the last concerts at the festival, August 27th. And it's interesting, it's different in a few ways. One is that it's about the city of Edinburgh, but it's called Festival City is the name of the piece. And it's about the relationship between the city and its festivals, because it's a huge contrast. And also, since I'm not there all the time, really a lot of the collaboration has been done online. When I have been there, it's been fantastic. I've met with everything from teenage bagpipers to Gallic choirs to, anyway. So that's what I'm working on now. And it's interesting because it's being done very soon after Toronto, and it's very, very, very different. Just wanted to quickly, since we're talking about technology, I just wanted to say two things that came to mind, which maybe are of interest. One is that, technology's changed so much since we've all been working in these fields. And it was hard to do everything 20 years ago, but now it's like, the problem is it's so easy. There's so much about it, like our daughters who are teenagers, there's so much on your iPhone that's so sophisticated that one thing I always like to tell people is that the reason technology is interesting is that it's the most malleable, the most neutral, the most transformable medium that we have. The only reason why it's interesting is because it lets you go from your imagination to something in the real world better than anything else we have. And it's hard to, sometimes it's easy to forget it because there's so much available. But it's really important to remember that. You can make anything if you master the roots of technology. And the other thing is that technology is the best bridge we have between something you want to do and getting it from you out into the world. So one of the first technology projects I did was with Yo-Yo Ma, where we built a very sophisticated cello that measured everything Yo-Yo did and transformed his playing. But the same technology can measure what a child does who maybe has a great idea but maybe not Yo-Yo's skill, or somebody who has a physical disability, or somebody who's ill. And so technology being malleable is what makes it possible for many, many people to participate in things that they couldn't otherwise. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks. Kate, what's coming to the city?
We have a number of percent projects that are coming to fruition, but we're also in a phase where we are actually opening a number of new or renovated buildings. We have a couple of buildings open in Brooklyn. It's the city's first, we're actually trying to build this on purpose, cultural district, and they'll be opening in October. And the Queens Museum, which has been under renovation for a number of years, is going to be reopening also this fall. And all of those projects are about creating, I think, a newer, smarter, revivified home for artists, but also for audiences for this kind of work. All of these organizations, some are theaters, some are visual arts organizations, but they're all really trying to engage and create an experience for viewers that I think is much more personal than what we've seen in the past. I mean, in a way, I kind of blame the invention of electric lights for having thrown us into a period in the arts where the audience is in the dark and the actors are in the light, and it's made the kind of audience engagement that people really seek much more difficult than it should be. And I think that's part of the reason why we've been through this period of resistance around art, including even in the world of museums. The thing that's on black velvet in a pin spot is more special than me, and therefore I have to be in a subordinate position to it. So we've been the beneficiaries, I think, of a lot of really interesting thinkers, architects, curators, administrators who are trying to work through this in productive ways. The one thing I would say about technology, I can't prove it, but I think in addition to the fact that we've seen a lot of public art projects that people have found very easy to respond to. And my one concern is that they're often championed by artists who are so incredibly thoughtful and articulate and charming. And all artists aren't that way. Like, very few people in the world are that way. And so I worry a little bit that the avatar of art has to be an extraordinary person as opposed to extraordinary art. But I'll take it however you can sort of breach the wall, that's good. But I do think the rise of social media has given people ways of participating that is creating less and less pushback against this. And it's interesting to me to try and think about, because if the reason people are resistant to art is that they don't feel they have a role in it, that's very helpful, if you're from the government and trying to create an environment in which more of this can happen. If that then has to be a component of these projects, and again, sewn into the expectations about them, it's a really good lesson to keep in mind.
It's a great time, frankly, a very dynamic, but a great time for public art in America when you look at projects like this. We have struggled for a long time with what we call behind the screen plop art. And this is a moment where the audience, through social media, is pushing back and saying, give us something that we can work with. Well, as an incredibly articulate and generous artist, what are you working on?
I'm still kind of recouping from the Bay Life.
Oh, that won't cut it.
2.5 years.
We'll bring Yvonne up here then to talk.
Okay. The amount of requests I'm getting to do proposals and the excitement it's generated is kind of overwhelming. And it's not just in the U.S. All kinds of cities and in other cities very far flung. So I'm doing a lot of proposals and trying to figure out what the next wave is, but also trying to be very intentional about it, not being just sort of taken into the next thing. So
yeah, these are crazy
the challenge
moments
of the artist,
yeah.
Figuring out your path, and what you don't do is as important as what you do.
When you get it right, though, the world beats a path to your door, and you've certainly done that. So why don't we take some questions? There's a microphone right here, so if you'd like to ask a question, and if you could just line up behind, and we'll take a few questions. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Debs from the Bay Area. Thank you, Leo. Why not the Golden Gate Bridge? Did you consider it, or it's just not feasible?
Well, I think the Bay Bridge had always been somewhat neglected and overshadowed by the Golden Gate, and the Bay Bridge actually opened before the Golden Gate and has always been kind of the workhorse bridge. But I sort of see it as two arms that are kind of embracing the bay and one big beautiful thing, and not one or the other. So having a chance to augment the Bay Bridge was really an exciting opportunity, and I think what's happening down on the Embarcadero is amazing, with the ferry building and all the energy down there with the hotels and restaurants, and I think this just adds to it. And certainly this year with the America's Cup races and the Year of the Bay and the opening of the new Exploratorium, just seems like all these things are happening, at a great time. So it's all building into this kind of great moment. Sure. If San Francisco wants a diptych, I'm ready.
Please, next question.
The cities that are represented.
Tell us who you are first, please.
Phil Kennicott. I'm with the Washington Post. So the cities that are represented here, Boston, New York, Toronto, are pretty exceptional. They've already got audiences. They have a cultural infrastructure. Is it conceivable we might reach a point at which cities like New York would provide cultural leadership to other cities or regions of the country that have no cultural budget or no infrastructure for doing this kind of thing? Is it possible you might think beyond kind of the taxpayers that are supporting you to a larger mission?
Kate, why don't you take a shot at that one?
I mean, I think we're in a period, and I know that there have been panels here at Aspen that have explored this, where cities are realizing increasingly that they're on their own. And 25 years ago, my last tour of duty in government, a lot of the innovation was coming down from the federal level, and that's just changed for lots of complicated reasons. So I think, again, cities are having to come up with all different kinds of ways of asserting their identity and for engaging in this sort of topic of quality of life. And they sort of watch each other. I think the role of government funding of the arts in this country is incredibly vexed and complicated. And too few cities have cultural budgets. I think people are still very suspicious of whether or not culture is a public service or not. And cities that engage in this, I think, have a responsibility to try and keep making that case. But from an advocacy point of view, I don't think we've even found the starting line, much less the finish line, in how to make it easier for this value proposition to spread. That said, Leo's being asked by all kinds of other cities to consider doing projects there. Tod is as well. Artists that have had work done in New York are sought out by other cities. I think in the arts, the leadership always has to be a kind of public-private partnership. It has to be asked for. And that's also kind of interesting because, again, government is in the business of delivering certain kinds of services. Big public art projects can often happen privately, and Yvonne's the sort of master of doing that. But once you get to a certain scale, you need some kind of buy-in on the public level, and breaking through the kind of resistance that's been part of the national discourse for so long. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, 2008, where you had, congressmen whose name I shall not repeat, in the course of discussing economic help for cities and states in the light of the economic downturn, talking about artists as not having real jobs, and jobs in the arts as not being real jobs. So, I think there's so many big public policy steps that need to be taken to appreciate the value of this. And on the other hand, it's happening. And the more it happens and the more it gets embraced, each example, I think, starts building a scaffolding for the next one. But art can't be formulaic. You can't just take a project from here to there. It has to be organic to a particular space.
The other thing is, you know this more than I do, but it seems like part of it's a question for taking a model like the amazing things you're doing in New York and helping other places, but these things go in waves, and it's a particularly amazing moment there to have you there and Mayor Bloomberg there, and it may not be like that in 10 years and other places, so it's a complex.
But you're saying what you're doing for Edinburgh is very different from what you did in Toronto.
Totally.
And I think that's part of it, is you have to get leaders to trust artists and be willing to follow their lead as it is specific to a location.
Mayors also talk a lot. I travel the country and talk to mayors, and what mayors know right now is that millennials decide where to live first based upon the amenities that are available to them, and then they decide what kind of job they're going to get. They start looking for a job. And culture is the number one thing that attaches people to their community. I always thought it was economics or civic engagement, but it's actually culture. And so it is an amazing, if you're in the culture business, it is an amazing moment right now, because mayors, for the first time in a very long time, are waking up to what these opportunities can mean to make their cities more vibrant places, and places where people who have high-paying jobs want to come. Next question.
I couldn't agree more. Yves Behar. I have a question about permanent versus temporary art. And one of the previous mayors of San Francisco, who shall remain unnamed, said that the way to get permanent art in place as to start with temporary. And so my question is it a gateway drug, essentially, temporary installations? Is it a gateway drug to permanent ones? And is in a way what I'm hearing is that social media is helping with that in a sense.
Leo, why don't you start with that one?
I think, I mean, once people see these things and get comfortable with them, and they realize, that at the National Gallery there was a lot of concern. Are people going to have seizures with 41,000 lights? And people just didn't know what to make of it. But when they saw how light was used in a very sophisticated and elegant way, and it has a real softness to it, and it's not aggressive at all and overwhelming, they realized, I can be with this every single day, and I love it. And then they really wanted it, and they kept it. So I think that it has that possibility, but I'm also, I think some things should be temporary. I think that's okay too. It's a tricky one. I think it's for the public really to decide.
It's tricky because so little permanent art has been installed, for example, in the Bay Area in the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, almost none. So I'm certainly hoping that that those are good. Those are gateway drugs to more permanent installations. Thank you,
Robert.
Kate, my name is Robert Lehrman. I'm a member of the board of the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. I'd like to ask your thoughts on what you said about public policy steps to change the misconceptions that art doesn't contribute in a more concrete way. We've just seen in the Supreme Court decision an enormous shift in a relatively short period of time about another social issue that was enormously polarizing. Could you talk about what you think the policy steps could be to change this misconception?
I think some of it is basic research. And for years, the world of culture has kind of stalled out on economic impact. It's playing a game that's valuable, but that you can ultimately never really win, because there's always going to be something that's going to provide a bigger economic impact. But I do think there needs to be much more strategy in telling number stories around the arts. But then I also think the arts community itself is sometimes its own worst enemy. Artists are fundamentally passionate about specific projects, and I think there isn't enough dialogue around the commonalities between different kinds of projects. There isn't a perspective that's saying, okay, you're doing this amazing and that's amazing, but here's the quantitative benefit of amazingness. I think doing that would give a greater sense of courage to trying to figure this out. It's interesting, something that Heather Watts and I were talking about yesterday. There is no Walter Cronkite for the arts in this country. There is no sort of neutral spokesman who can say, this is why this art project, which is inevitably engendering controversy, is a good thing and can speak from enough of a position of trust and value to help try and create that. So I think, in other words, it has to process in a number of different ways. I'm hoping that social science will actually start pitching in here. My favorite piece of research that I would love to graft onto culture is a criminological study on something called collective efficacy that's been going on in Chicago for a while. And it basically looks at two different neighborhoods that are identical socioeconomically, and why is one totally functional and people say hello to each other on the streets and there are geraniums in the window boxes, and why is another completely crime-ridden, broken windows, boarded up. And it's because in the effective neighborhood, people have been given a sense of community that allows the grandmothers to tell the kids to take the earpieces out of their ears and look them in the eye and shake hands. And in the other, that's completely non-existent. My sense is that culture is a huge civilizing force. It can perform that kind of function. It can create commonalities of space. Museums are places in which all kinds of people mix and mingle. There aren't that many social institutions that create that together. Leo's point, people building campfires, watching his project, you get a sense of community around art that's really important, but we can't measure any of that yet. And until we can, I think it will be very difficult to make the case as successfully as we need to. But I think increasingly people are interested in trying.
So we're at the Aspen Ideas Festival, but maybe we should try for the Aspen Results Festival. When you go back home, if you're politically engaged, invite an artist to help you with a political project. If you're not politically engaged, get politically engaged with an artist. One of my... They're a little more willing to be asked lately. I don't know why that is, but I'm really happy about it. Please join me in thanking Tod, Kate, and Leo.
How long did it take to make the lights on the bridge?
It took 2.5 years from the initial idea, but it took about 5 months to hang them up there with all the guys who helped me do that.
How old are you? Okay, so he started when you were 4.
Would have been faster with his help.
Sure. Thank you, everybody.